Rules of exponents and powers. This lesson is going to review the rules of exponents and how they are used on the ACT college entrance exam. I am going to show you when to add, subtract, or multiply the exponents. I am also going to discuss how things work with negative numbers and exponents. Now, let's head over to the classroom to review the rules of exponents. Let's talk about rules of exponents. First thing I want to talk about is adding terms. Don't forget, terms are separated by pluses and minuses. But I'm talking about terms like if you had x squared plus 2x squared. So the variable has the same power, and that has to be true to be able to add terms like that. You have to have the same power of the variable. The only thing you got to do now is just basically add the numbers in front of the variables. An example, if you had 3x squared plus 2x squared. What you're going to do is you're going to keep the x squared. And all you got to do is add the numbers in front of the x squareds, called the coefficients. So you're going to take and add 3 and 2 and get 5x squared. It's kind of like, I use this analogy, if you're going to the school, going to a grocery store, you're going to buy apples. You got 2 apples and 3 apples, you got 5 apples. You still got apples. You don't have applesauce, you don't have apple cider, you don't have apple juice. You have apples. So that's a weird way to remember it, but you're going to leave the x squared alone and you're just going to add or subtract the numbers in front. Another example. If I had 7x cubed minus 11x cubed. Both terms have x cubed. You cannot subtract these if it was 7x cubed minus 11x to the fourth. They have to have the same powers. X has to have the same power. So all you do is you take 7 minus 11 and you get negative 4. And you keep the x cubed. That's how you add terms with like exponents. Now let's talk about multiplication now. Rules are a little different. And here's what you need to remember: when you multiply, you add the exponents. Example. If you have x squared times x cubed. Here's a situation where you add the exponents. When you multiply, you add the exponents. So you're going to get x to the 2 plus 3, or x to the 5th. Let's try a trickier one. Let's try one with a negative exponent. See how you handle that one. X squared times x to the negative 3. Well, you're going to keep that x, that's called the base, and you're going to go 2 plus a negative 3. So that's going to give you x to the negative 1. Now in a little bit we're going to talk about negative exponents, but just since we have it here, let's talk about it. We have x to the negative first. That's actually equal to, if we want to write it in terms of positive exponents, because math people, they like positive exponents. Maybe they're just optimistic. So that's going to be written as 1 over x to the positive first. Or you can even write it as 1 over x. That's probably how you're going to see it on the ACT exam. So now you know when you have to add the exponents. Let's talk about when you got to subtract them. Quick review. When you multiply, you add the exponents. When you divide, you subtract them. So when you're going to end up subtracting the exponents, that's when you're dividing. Example. If you have x to the 5th over x squared. That will be equal to x to the 5 minus 2. Which is x to the 3rd, or x cubed. Another example. say you had x squared, or x to the power of 2, over x to the 7th. You're dividing, so you're going to subtract those exponents. So it's going to give you x to the 2 minus 7. 2 minus 7, that's a negative 5. Uh-oh, got another negative exponent. And once again, we don't like negative exponents. Us math people, that's just how it is. We're going to write that as 1 over x to the positive 5. And that's probably how you're going to see your answer on the ACT. They're not going to write it as x to the negative 5. They're going to have 1 over x to the positive 5. So you need to be aware of it. They like to write things in terms of positive powers. That's just how math goes. All right, so now you know when to add the exponents. You know when to subtract them. You know when to leave them alone. So that's dealing with the first 3 situations. Now let's talk about when you got to multiply the exponents. And a lot of times, what would be a situation that would be a red flag to tell you to multiply? Parentheses. Whenever you see parentheses, you think multiply. So that's when you're going to have to multiply exponents. Let me give you an example of what that would look like. Say I give you, in parentheses, x cubed. And then that's raised to an exponent of 2. So that would be pronounced x cubed squared, if you will. You see parentheses. You see a power outside the parentheses, and you see a power inside the parentheses. That should tell you to multiply. When you see parentheses, you multiply. So that's what we're going to do. You're going to take and write that as x to the 3 times 2. So your final answer should look like x to the 6th. All right, now they can get trickier. We could throw a coefficient in there. We could throw a number in front of that x cubed. So let's do that. 3x, in parentheses, 3x to the 4th, squared, or raised to a power of 2. A lot of times people, what students like to do, they just like to multiply the 4 and 2 and be done with it. And they would write their answer as 3x to the 8th. And you would miss it. Guess what the first choice is on your ACT test? They're going to have that. But you've got to remember that you have this 3 to deal with. That 3 has got a power of 1 in it. It's just not written. So I'm going to put a 1 here. And what you got to do with this power of 2 that you have out here now is you have to take that 2 and distribute it. Another thing that would help you remember, when you would learn about distribution, you'd have a number out front, a set of parentheses, and you'd have terms inside, and you would have to take that number and distribute to each term. Well, you're going to do the same idea. You're going to do that with the exponents now. So you're going to take the power of 2, you're going to distribute 2 times 1, and get 3 squared. And you're going to take and multiply the 2 and 4 and get x to the 8th. Now on the test, on the college entrance exam, that's not how it's going to look. You have to evaluate what 3 squared is, which is not 6, guys. It's 3 times 3. Another answer they're going to probably have. They're going to probably have 6x to the 8th. You could easily mess that up. You got to think of it as, even if you have to, cover this parentheses up and look at it as 3 squared. 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9. So your final answer is going to look like 9x to the 8th. I think you got it now, but now let's get more into the negative exponents and negative numbers and what that really means. If I gave you a negative number raised to a power, like negative 3 raised to the power of 2, or exponent of 2. What does that mean? That means negative 3 times itself 2 times. Means negative 3 times negative 3, guys. And that's going to give you a positive answer of 9. Well, what if you did negative 3 in parentheses now, cubed? Well, that means negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. Negative times a negative is positive. That means the negative 3 times negative 3, that's positive 9 times a negative 3, that's a negative 27. here's what you kind of have to remember. How many negatives do you got there? You got a total of 3. That's odd. Here you had, for the number 9, you had only 2 negatives. That's an even amount of negatives. So let me kind of summarize a rule that will help you with these two situations. If you have a negative number, in parentheses, there's an issue. We're going to talk about that here in a second. Raised to some power n. If that n, that power, that exponent, is even, what kind of answer do you think you're going to get? Well, you would have, if you had a power of 2, an exponent of 2, you would have 2 negatives. You're going to get a positive answer. If n is odd, you're going to get a negative answer out of it. It's that simple. You don't have to write it out now. That's how the rule works. But here's one of the most commonly missed questions. And I'm going to write this as a true-false because a lot of people will miss this. If you write negative 3 squared like this, and you're asked, well, is that the same thing as negative 3 in parentheses squared? You're going to find out that this is not a true statement. Let me prove it to you. The left side of this equation. What this negative in front of the 3 squared actually means is a negative 1 times 3 squared. The other side of this equation, it means negative 3 times negative 3. So the right side is going to be a positive 9. The other side, you have to remember how do you have to do things? Order of operations. Well, you got to do the power first. You have to do the exponent first before you can multiply times a negative 1. So you're going to take 3 and square it, get 9. Negative 1 times 9 is negative 9. And you'll see that negative 9 is not equal to positive 9. Watch out for your signs when you have pluses and minuses involved, especially if they're in parentheses or if they're powers. Okay, last thing I want to talk about in exponents is negative exponents or negative numbers inside of them. What do I mean? Let me show you by example. The rule goes like this. If you have a number x, we'll call it x, raised to a negative power, we'll call it negative n. That is referred to as 1 over x to the n. We want positive exponents again. That's how the answers are going to be written on the test. Your choices are going to be in positive exponents. So you've got to know how to change a negative exponent to a positive exponent. It's very important. Let me give you a couple examples. See, I gave you 2 to the negative 3. That will be 1 over 2 to the positive 3. You want to make it positive exponents. We understand positive exponents better. So we're going to leave the 1 on top. And all you got to do is evaluate what 2 cubed is, which is 8. Let's go over another example. See, I gave you a negative 2 in parentheses now, raised to the negative 3. A very subtle difference from the first one. You've got to watch this now. You're going to write this as 1 over parentheses negative 2 to the positive 3. Notice that the negative 2 inside the parentheses doesn't change. The negative 2 is not an exponent. The only thing that changes signs is the exponent in this case, and that's all you change. Don't get in the habit of wanting to change all the signs just because it's got it in parentheses. That's the key. It stays the way it is. So you're going to leave a 1 on top. And you're going to evaluate negative 2 to the 3rd power, or negative 2 cubed. Like I said earlier, we were talking about negative exponents raised to an odd in this situation. That means we have 3 negatives there. So since that's an odd number of negatives, we're going to have a negative answer in the bottom. So you can go ahead and put a minus there, a negative sign, and go ahead and calculate 2 cubed, and that's 8. So you have 1 over negative 8 as your answer. But I bet you how they're going to write it on the ACT exam as a choice, they're not going to put the negative in the bottom. So sometimes that confuses people. All you have to know is if you take a positive 1 and divide it by a negative 8, that's going to give you a negative number. So the negative they'll put out front, and then you'll just have 1/8 following it. In conclusion, understanding exponents will be an important skill on the ACT math exam.